And counting down from 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8. Of course, I am live again. I am Earl Holland for the Sports Refuge Podcast, doing another live stream. And of course, we are here to talk with guests about their connection to sports. And my next guest that we're doing for another live stream for a future episode coming down the pike a little bit later this summer is a long time, someone I've known for a very long time during his time working for the Delmarva Shorebirds as well. And I'm glad to have him on. And he has some interesting stories to talk about his time in minor league baseball and being the mascot for his alma mater, Slippery Rock University. And here with me is Brandon Berns. Brandon, thank you for being on the podcast. I'm so glad that you're being a part of this. And thank you for being on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me back, Earl. Appreciate it.
Oh yeah, no problem. And for those of you guys who have not seen Brandon on, he's been on a couple of our MLB Hall of Fame podcast roundtables where we talked about the eligibility and things of that nature for some of the people on the ballot for the Hall of Fame each year. We've done 2 years in a row. We're going to, of course, do that again later on down the road. But Brandon, welcome to the show again. And let's get into the interview. Biggest thing I know you from is your time working in minor league baseball for the Delmarva Shorebirds. And of course, we can always go back and talk about your early life as well. But how did you get involved in minor league baseball for the Shorebirds? And what was that experience like?
It kind of started out from an internship, actually, with my major at Slippery Rock was sport management. So what I needed to do for my final capstone was a 12-week or 480-hour internship, whatever came last. And I kind of threw out there to all the minor league baseball teams in Eastern Pennsylvania, as well as in Maryland and Delaware. And the Shorebirds were the team that I landed with there for the 2007 summer. And, from that perspective, I jumped right in to do the on-field MC work as well as a lot of the marketing work, and then parlayed that into a part-time role during the offseason then as Sherman. And then I got hired on full-time after the 2007 season concluded in the ticketing department.
What is normally the routine like in the ticketing department? What do you have to do on an average day?
For the most part, it's checking in with a lot of your season ticket holders, whether they be your full or half season or even your mini plan holders. But then a lot of times it's calling to, prospect new clients there on the Eastern Shore. It was a big, conundrum to, really get those fans out. The Eastern Shore is obviously a very, very large area from Ocean City all the way up through Easton, and then all the way down to the lower parts of Virginia there and up into Delaware. So, from my perspective, I always had the Ocean City kind of north to Rehoboth and then over to the Georgetown area. And that was my area for sales for the most part, to really dive into the corporations. But then also from the group perspective, I also was in charge of our Little League program as well. So getting all the Little League kids out, not only for fundraising events, but then also for Little League lineups. And those were the kids that took the field with the Shorebirds on a nightly basis.
And it's interesting, especially with the Delmarva Peninsula. You basically, I know a lot of people may not even think about Newcastle County, but you're in a peninsula where there are 2 minor league teams. Of course, looking at the Shorebirds and, of course, where I'm at right now, the Blue Rocks on the opposite end. And it's very interesting. While there's such a large area, it's sometimes 2 diverse populations once you start the further north you get.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the things that we always kind of saw with the ticketing side of things. If you were north of Dover, most of the times you went to a Blue Rocks game. If you were kind of south of that line, you'd come down to see the Shorebirds there in Salisbury.
And I like I said, it's really tough because and the tougher thing was they weren't even the same minor league. They're in two different leagues, so two different levels. So while I mean, unfortunately, due to the realignment, it still doesn't work out the way it is now. Where it's Aberdeen and Wilmington together, as opposed to where it used to be Frederick and Wilmington, I believe. But I mean, if it was a case where if it was Delmarva and Wilmington, that would be something. Yeah, you could always get into a nice friendly rivalry. You could always get people come see both, and I feel like that's a unique thing. Sometimes that's something that gets a little lost, just because where they're honestly about 100 miles apart when you look at it, and that's not a bad trip. That's probably closer than going to some of the other stops in New Jersey or even back then in the South Atlantic League. I think about Columbus, where the Red Sox used to play, and then going to North Carolina and all those things like that. And you think, man, this is probably and even Hagerstown, and think these things were sort of made, but it just never ever seemed to fall in place.
Yeah, and that's what I remember from my time there. We always had that rivalry with Lakewood, especially, and then the trips back and forth to Hagerstown, and then even in the early years when we had that fun rivalry with the Lake County team that was right outside Cleveland. So they were usually the three teams that we saw the most there in my early years with the Shorebirds.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You mentioned Hagerstown, and I don't know if you saw the pictures on Twitter. They're tearing down the stadium there now. Unfortunately, that's a casualty of which happens sometimes in minor league baseball. Getting a new facility, they were trying to get it for a while and just never had the time. Things didn't work out, and then all of a sudden, the Suns being basically decommissioned by MLB when they did the realignment for the minor leagues, and unfortunately. Sometimes historic ballparks, they end up going by the wayside.
Yeah, and that's sad to see because I think that was one of those stadiums that's been around for close to 100 years. And I remember when my last year in baseball, when they kind of redid the entire field. That was when they had Bryce Harper coming in as his first year in baseball. And I remember that whole project being redone when they completely redid the field there in Hagerstown.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Like I said, I guess especially in minor league baseball, you don't have the star power sometimes that the major leagues or upper levels may have, and things like that. How do you try to best to draw fans and customers into the stadium?
Well, one of the biggest things, obviously, as you said, we didn't really know the players or, the win-loss record a lot of times because, at the single A level was all about development. So I think one of the biggest things that we always used to pitch was it's that family-friendly atmosphere, when you kind of look at, the perspective of coming to a minor league baseball game as opposed to going out to the movies or, any other of the entertainment that you might, be interested in going to, a minor league baseball game really dove into, you could absolutely do it on a budget, and it was family affordable to come out on multiple nights throughout the summer there, or if you were in town for vacation, it was something different than going to the beach or anything like that.
And you mentioned you did a little work as Sherman sometimes. How did that get started?
Yes, so I think that kind of all got started. I think as we looked at my previous career, while I was in college, I actually was our university mascot for 4 years while I was in college. So those days in the off season that we might have a hit the books appearance during the day, or hey, the mascot might not be able to make it. Those would be the nights that I would jump into the suit and don as I did in college there, and be able to knock out those appearances and really interact with the community and whatever kids we were also interacting with as well. So I took great pride in being able to do those appearances and really supporting the different programs from our sponsor perspective then as well.
How long does it take to get into the suit, and really, what is it like being in the suit? What is the best way to describe that?
I would say getting in the suit, depending on the suit, could take between 5 to 10 minutes, depending on how elaborate the costume is. Some suits are kind of the one piece, which a lot of the suits that I were in, especially going back to my days as Rocky or even as Sherman, they were kind of one piece bodysuits and they, had the feet and had the head. So you could slip in and out of those pretty quickly. Also, from my mascot experience, I was actually a part-time mascot for the Youngstown Steelhounds, which were a CHL team based in Youngstown, Ohio during the 06 and 07 seasons that lasted about 2 years in the now defunct Central Hockey League. But from that perspective, that was kind of a suit that was more in the piecemeal to where it was the legs, it was, different pieces, and also the head then. So that took a little bit more time. But, I can definitely say that those, experiences were very hot, no matter the weather that was outside, whether it could be, 10 degrees outside or if it's, 90 degrees outside. You were definitely going to be sweating, and you had to, be mindful of, your endurance, as well as making sure that you were taking enough, rest and water breaks in between, interacting with the crowds or, being on those appearances.
How are you able to, I guess, consume enough water to stay hydrated and things like that? Because I am assuming that the biggest key as a mascot is never take the head off while
Yep.
you're in public.
Yes. So I think from that perspective, I know for me, when I was in college, I always would have a gallon of water kind of stashed away in a hiding spot, whether that be in the trainer's room or, behind the bleachers in a secluded area. I think, for a lot of these different areas, especially, in the stadiums, even there at Arthur W. Pugh Stadium, I used to duck in behind the ice cream stand and be able to take a short break. Or, we had a room specifically by the visitor locker room to where you could duck in and kind of take that break, or, even dive into the front office for a little bit. And, I would hide in my cube potentially if, we were during a game, or, I come and visit you guys in the press box as well. So, as long as you kind of weren't in the sight of any of the, fans, or especially, kids, because that can be a traumatic experience to see, hey, a 7-foot bird just took his head off, and, we never want to have that happen at all. So.
Yeah, I think especially when it comes to anything, and it's like, even think about the puppeteers that did Big Bird or anything like that. You don't want to kill the illusion, because that can, like you said, it can be traumatic. It can do some serious damage. It can be, a PR nightmare. Sure, it's not like that scene in Ace Ventura where the Eagles mascot is fighting with Jim Carrey,
Yep.
but it can be probably very close to that.
Yeah, and that was always, the thing, as you kind of looked at that, and there were often times that, we wanted to keep that illusion to where I would get dressed at the stadium, and then everybody knows the Sherman Mobile, and I would just duck myself into the back seat and ride full suit in to wherever appearances we might be going to, whether that be a little league or to an elementary school.
And normally, how many times a week, especially during the off season, would Sherman make appearances?
Sherman was out a good ton. I know when I was there, I would probably say we were averaging probably 4 or 5, appearances there within a week. Oftentimes, especially during hit the book season, we were kind of hitting 2 to 3 schools a day, and doing those type of appearances to really get the program going, and get everybody enthused about not only reading but the shorebirds themselves.
How did you initially get an interest in portraying Rocky during your time at Slippery Rock? How did that get started, and did you even go far back as high schools doing that?
No, so high school, I played football and baseball, and kind of wasn't a thing on the map at all, and it just kind of randomly hit me as I was moving in my freshman year. I lucked out, and there was signs around the dorms to join the Rock Rowdies, which is our student section there at Slippery Rock. So I figured, hey, I'm going to be going to the sporting events anyway. And then, I just my RA happened to be part of the cheerleading team. So, from that perspective, the individual that was portraying Rocky beforehand was actually graduating that semester. That was an incoming freshman. So, that kind of parlayed into, my RA grabbed me the one time and said, hey, we're looking for a new mascot. Do you want to come try it? And I'm like, obviously a week into college at that point. And I'm like, well, why not? And I happened to go to practice. I jumped in the suit, and 45 minutes later, I was the mascot for all 4 years while I was at Slippery Rock. So, I did, every football game, girls and, men's basketball. And then, as I kind of progressed through, my college career, it was, if I had a chance to, in between classes, I would go hit a baseball game, a softball game, soccer, water polo, you name the sport, I would try and go support those teams as well. So, and then oftentimes as I got older in my senior year, I would just kind of wander around campus as a normal student then as well, if I had nothing else to do at the time. So I know that was the about the same time that the whole Randall Simon assaulting the sausage in Milwaukee incident happened as well. And I actually had a reporter from the Butler Eagle, as well as our school paper, follow me around for the day. And there's a full article that I actually have framed here in my room of just talking about mascot abuse and those instances. But it was a fun experience, and at the end of the day, it's something I cherish throughout the years. So.
And one of the things I want to ask you as well, when you're in there, when you are in there, I'm assuming you have to put on a completely different personality. Was it something that you had to jump out of your shell to sort of do?
Yeah, I think, from my perspective, it was one of those things to where, I feel like I really didn't have a shell, coming into that experience. But I think, as we kind of look at mascotting, it's kind of just, as everybody kind of jokes, it's that super alter ego that gets kind of morphed to the nth degree. And, the way I always kind of portrayed it was, looking at this as a WWE type character of, what most outrageous thing that I could ever do inside the suit that would not get myself in trouble, but then in the same breath, get a laugh out of it, or, have that experience that somebody's going to remember, as we kind of look at it. And, both from the Shorebirds perspective, as well as, from, our, my time with Rocky. I think, my friends to this day, I hear from parents of, former cheerleaders to say, hey, I get my daughter was cheering, but I oftentimes came to see what antics you were going to do on the sidelines there. So.
What are some of the typical routines that Rocky would end up doing during games?
I think my biggest ones. I was kind of the prop guy, so I would obviously go grab anything I could find and help our band director try and assist the band in his conducting, which was always a fun one because he would always kind of shoo me away. We also had a lot of fans that would have little lions as well. The big one with the Rock. We didn't necessarily have a true nickname, as some would be the Warriors or the Falcons or whatever. We were just kind of the Rock. But one of the big things we did trademark up there was called Rock Pride, because we did have two lions right outside one of our oldest buildings at West Gym. So that's where kind of the lion came from. And a lot of times we'd have parents bring lions to the game, and I was kind of always do the Lion King, Mufasa, Rafiki, holding the lion up type scenario in the stands. So, I think, the biggest thing was always, really just interacting with the student body as well. Then I always got enjoyment of, poking fun at somebody that, might not have known it was me in the suit, but I might have had class with them as well. So it was always fun to come in and the next day and kind of see, hey, if I'm at a basketball game, if I annoyed somebody or, took somebody's shoe and ran with it, or, those, little antics you'd always have at those games. And then you'd hear about it in class the next day and, people didn't know it was me. So that was always fun to really go back and forth with. So.
It's interesting you mentioned the Simba thing, raising up the lion, which now has become a big thing in minor league and major league ballparks, because you can't go anywhere without seeing them play Circle of Life and having the cam on the parents holding their babies up. Yep. And doing something very similar to that.
Yep, or I've seen it with Dog Night as well when they do Pup Night. So
that's one of those things. I wouldn't take that risk with a dog, especially some dogs startle easily, and that's the last thing you'd want to do when it comes to lifting your dog up. It's sort of, without having to tell, hey, I'm lifting it up. It's all right, because we have that issue right now with our dog. Sometimes dog gets startled, won't do, some of the worst things you expect. They just yelp a little, but sometimes you got to tell them, hey, I'm picking you up. It's fine. But actually, speaking of dogs, I know you have your own dog as well, Baxter. How did Baxter end up becoming a social media star?
Well, I think that was kind of a running joke between my fiance and I of, hey, a lot of our parents wanted to see him, especially my niece as well. So, we just kind of made a social media with them and, kind of started to just, to put random pictures out there with them. And as we kind of started just randomly tagging people, that kind of took off then as well. Last time I checked, he was over 5,000 followers already on Instagram. And it's funny that most of his followers are actually coming from Scandinavia as well as in the Far East and Japan. So my running joke is, Baxter's a big deal in, Norway, Finland, and also in Japan. So, but it's kind of funny, for a lot of his antics and, this cute post that we do. But, for the most part, we get responses back from Chewy, PetSmart. Anytime that, he gets a bark box, we tag him, and, he seems to get responses back from everybody. So He's become the mayor of our street. I know, especially here. So we actually just celebrated his third birthday this past weekend with a small little party of his, as well as having a bunch of his friends come down from daycare. So we had about 8 dogs that were about 20 pounds or less all run around the backyard on Saturday.
And I know, of course, dogs, like children, especially babies, they are sometimes very either temperamental or hard to really get them to focus when it comes to the camera. How do you do that, especially with Baxter?
I think with him, it's a lot of times just trying to get his attention. Squeaky toys, food, especially cheese is one of the great ones. But I think as I've kind of learned with him is just taking pictures of him with as he's kind of in the action of all his little antics that he does, whether it's getting breakfast out on the porch or just chasing around his friends on Saturday. So.
And going back to the mascot discussion, who are some of your favorite mascots out there? I know, of course, a few years ago, Gritty took a lot of the Mid-Atlantic, even, places outside of Philadelphia by storm. And, of course, with some mascots, people either love them or hate them, and it's sort of that middle ground there. But who are some of your current favorite mascots?
Well, I know, just as a homer here for the Penguins, obviously Iceberg's a big one for me. I've had great interactions with him, both coming to events and kind of interacting with him there at the arena. But, as you mentioned, Gritty, when Gritty first came out, I was very anti-Gritty. But Gritty has definitely grown on me over the years. I think, as I kind of look at some of the antics that I portrayed in college more so than probably when I was with the Shorebirds or with the Steelhounds. Gritty definitely has my heart on some of the videos that he does post. And, especially I just remember the one of, him at the aquarium taking out all the sharks and all the stuffed animals and giving them elbow drops because they were playing San Jose that night. But, I think, as, he's taken it by storm, and I know even just, watching him fight the kids during the intermissions and putting him in the penalty box and, the kids just taking a run at him and, or even during the pandemic, he was entertaining himself, as there's nobody in the arena, but he's getting, pictures drawn like he's, in the movie The Titanic, or he's playing with a ball pit or, different things. And I think, as people are, looking at that mascot experience, it's one of those things to where, those are videos that are played over and over and over again. And I know, like, even with me as Sherman, I had the most fun when we were shooting our commercials, going into the season to where, I'm potentially beating up a copier or, hey, I fell off an office chair when I'm, trying to help make sales calls, or even, the one where we blew the air horn at Joe Mahoney and Brandon Monahan as they were walking in the locker room. And then they, fake tied me to the foul pole then with some caution tape as well. So, those things are what I'm going to remember, and just doing those experiences.
Yeah, it feels like, things like being an Orioles fan, I always think of the bird. That's always a big one. The Fanatic, especially, as well. And those are some of the classic ones. What are some, I guess, least favorite mascots? Like you said, Gritty grew on you, but who are the ones that you're like, God, this makes no sense? The correlation to the team or things like that.
I mean, I from a personal story, I've always kind of had an angst against the Rockies mascot. Just from my time when I worked the 06 All-Star game, I got stuck in a freight elevator with him, and he just kept bopping me with his head the entire time when I was in the freight elevator. So he and I didn't really get along that night. So, but, I think, beyond that, though, as you kind of look at those mascots, the more creative they can be with them. I always kind of like the, anthropomorphic ones, like Youppi, Slider, they're always the fun ones, when you kind of just have that, random one to where it's like, hey, they're a person, or, it's kind of one of those, you don't really understand where the connection comes in. Those are the mascots I would say, it happens. So.
Yeah, I always say this, and I probably might get some flack from people. The celery, when it comes to the Blue Rock Stadium, I have no idea how they're connected. I mean, I understand the moose, but the celery, I don't get it. Maybe that's just something in Northern Delaware that I haven't been able to figure out, but I don't know. I got to go to more Blue Rocks games as well. One thing we always were talking about a while ago, especially through Facebook posts, were hypothetical or sports hypotheticals, what ifs. When we got into like a whole chain discussion about what if this happened, what if that happened. And I was just thinking about this. We can talk about a few hypothetical sports what ifs. And one of the biggest things we always talk about, just because the history really impacted a couple of things. But for example, we'll use this. What happened? What do you think would have happened if Bill Belichick didn't get fired by Art Modell as the team moved to Baltimore? Do you think that the Ravens would, Tom Brady would have been a Ravens legend along with Ray Lewis and Jonathan Ogden? Those things probably still wouldn't have changed because those guys were first round picks. They were going to happen years down the road. Tom Brady's still probably a 7th round pick, and he gets picked by Baltimore instead of New England because Bill Belichick is a head coach in Baltimore.
Yeah, I think, those are always the fun ones to kind of look through. And I think, as you said, really looking at that first move, they had a team like coming with them from Cleveland when they first moved into Baltimore. Like you said, having Ogden and having this, Ray Lewis there as those first round picks when they first move. I think, regardless of who was that, quarterback, that 2000 team was going to win that Super Bowl no matter, who was the coach that year. But, that's one of those things, as you kind of look at Belichick and, those stout defenses that he's had, really with no name guys in New England for the most part, having those, type of studs, I think, a potential dynasty could have, leaded, regardless of the quarterback, there in Baltimore. But I think, even with Brady, I always kind of say, you always kind of read the stories that, if he didn't go to New England, that the Jets might have been on to him. It could have been, the curse of the Jets, as, we've kind of saw for the last 2 decades. But, I think, as we look at, him potentially landing into Baltimore, not people, don't remember it. All it took is one Mo Lewis hit. And, we might never have heard about Tom Brady. It could have been, could he have been in that scenario of, always being that career backup or, getting his one shot and maybe not, being with the correct team at the time. So, I think, as you kind of look at that, from even in the 2001, 02 season when Brady kind of, really hit the scene, I think, when you look at that Baltimore team, he would have been able to ride that defense for a very, very long time, I think, until the salary cap really caught up with him like it did for the Ravens there in, 02, 03.
Yeah, and I think Anthony Wright might have been the backup behind Trent Dilfer and all those other guys, and eventually Anthony Wright. I remember he got his shot to play in that shootout against Seattle. So was not to say that Brady wouldn't have got a shot for either an injured or ineffective Trent Dilfer and just really taking hold of that. But then again, who knows? Maybe Belichick still gets fired a couple years down the road. Brian Billick comes in, and then it still doesn't matter. So it's a lot of what ifs when you think about those things because certain things maybe don't know what other decision to occur. Maybe you have a defense not only with Ray Lewis, Jamie Sharper, a lot of those Peter Bulware, all those other guys, and maybe all of a sudden you end up getting guys like Richard Seymour and things like that, and they still end up showing up and becoming Hall of Fame caliber players, but then they're playing with instead of Teddy Bruschi and all this other stuff, it's Ray Lewis. And like I said, that Chris McAllister, DeJuan Landry, and all those other guys.
Yeah, and I think even from an offensive perspective too, you gotta look back and say, hey, does Lewis run for 2,000 yards if Brady's on that roster? Because as we kind of saw what Brady kind of morphed into, especially the years that he had Moss, does that offense completely change and go from a run heavy defensive to, hey, we're throwing the ball 50 times?
Mm-hmm. And, like I said, that's one of the first possible what ifs. I'm going to throw this out. And I just thought about it's going to basketball. This is something I've been thinking about for the longest time. What if Michael Jordan didn't retire after the first 3 titles? Does he win 8 in a row? Does he end up still losing to the Knicks in the conference finals in 94? Does Hakeem Olajuwon still beat the Bulls? Does he end up beating the Bulls? Does he end up being one of the best players still in the 90s? Because then now, looking at it, the Bulls always had problems with the Rockets, and because they were really always outmanned at center.
Yeah, I think that one, I think, Earl, as you kind of look at it, I would bet money on Jordan probably winning those, at least one more title in there, whether he went 4 or, had that year off, because I think more so the first year with the Rockets, that they would have probably, because they were, nasty that year. But I think that second year, I believe the Rockets were actually a 6 seed coming into the playoffs and had the, step up and beat a lot of teams. And I believe that was the same year that the Nuggets actually upset the Sonics as well in the first round as an 8-1.
Yeah, and I also think about that. I believe I just saw an article that came out either over the weekend where Penny Hardaway said, us beating the Bulls in that conference finals in 90, and I think it was 95, ended up setting up the Bulls retooling and becoming that 72-10 team. Maybe them going past the Magic changes their fortunes, and then who knows what ends up happening, because I believe either they played the Knicks or the Pacers in the conference finals, the Magic did in 95. So I am not sure what ends up happening. Maybe the Bulls end up getting past whoever, either I believe it's Indiana. Indiana Pacers. They were playing the Indiana Pacers. So who knows? And I think the Bulls probably don't have any issues against the Pacers. But interestingly enough, I mean, I think because Scottie Pippen probably walks down, right, unless there's no real person that could really lead them past the Bulls. I think it's Jordan and Pippen go to the finals against the Rockets. That would be a very interesting one. And I think as you mentioned, that second Rockets team, they ended up picking up Clyde Drexler in the middle of that deadline. They didn't have him when they played the Knicks in the first finals in 94. So who knows what ends up happening? Does Clyde Drexler still get his first ring? Does he end up being another one of those mid-90s players like Karl Malone, like Charles Barkley, like Patrick Ewing, like John Stockton, who end up going ringless because of Michael Jordan? You never really know.
Yeah, and I think, as you look at the NBA, we can really even kind of look at, today's game of, are there those instances of just, the player movement side of things of, hey, who are those next individuals that aren't going to get the ring? Because, I think we saw with just LeBron and the dominance, and even, Steph now of, I think we're kind of in that same, run to where, there's a lot of super teams that are out there. And, are we going to look back in 10, 15 years and say, hey, here's a bunch of Hall of Fame players that got nowhere near a ring?
Yeah, especially either pride or things like that. But then you have guys like Giannis who end up getting their ring, going through beating tough teams, beating an Atlanta team, beating a very another super team in the Nets, even though they weren't fully healthy, but they still find their way, get their ring, beat a good Phoenix team as well in the finals, and at least he can say he has a ring, and it's not one of those people like in the era of the Warriors and LeBron, as you mentioned, getting shut out. Or deciding if you can't beat them, join them.
Absolutely.
Any particular matchup that you've always wanted to see in sports, doesn't matter who it was, that we either were robbed of or something like that? I know first thing comes to mind to me is we never got to see Kobe Bryant's Lakers against LeBron James in the finals, because it's everybody's having the discussion about the greatest of all time. And it's interesting. A lot of people are saying LeBron James over Michael Jordan at this point, which I'll say this as we go along with it. LeBron James, by the end of his career, will hold a ton of NBA records, but it's hard to even put him, unless he wins at least 2 more rings to even start being put in the conversation. There's at least 3 or 4 other people aside from Michael Jordan that would be ahead of him. And one of them is Kobe Bryant. Kobe Bryant has 5 rings, regardless of how, everybody's going to say he basically forced Shaq out of LA. He did this and did that, but still 5 rings. And a thing like this, LeBron is 1-1 against Tim Duncan. He hasn't beaten LeBron. He hasn't beaten Kobe. He never got to face Kobe in the finals. He lost to an inferior Orlando team that Kobe Bryant destroyed in the finals. And you also look at that, couldn't beat the Celtics at one point, had to team up with everybody else to beat the Celtics, still lost to Golden State as well at one point, lost to the Spurs. And it's sort of like, and again, not here to slander LeBron James. It's just, there's a lot of other people I put ahead of LeBron James as the greatest. That's why I'm like, a matchup between him and Kobe. If Kobe ends up beating LeBron, that's really 6 rings, or it's probably still 5 rings. Who knows?
Yeah, I think from that one, Earl, I think, as you kind of look back, especially, at different sports, it's one of those to where, I would say, it for me, it's, I always want to see my favorite teams kind of get into that, final perspective and say, hey, the what if. I always think back to, the 06 Mets I think, that team, breaks my heart that, Andy Chavez made that ridiculous, catch to keep them alive in the NLCS. And then, they squandered it literally 2 innings later against the Cardinals. But, to see, that team go up against the Red Sox that year, is there, that chance that, the Red Sox don't win that title, or, even going back to, for me, I know I was only like, barely born, but, reliving the, Mets and Red Sox in the 86 series, or, the year before, when the Dolphins and, Marino in his only Super Bowl appearance, could he have another shot at Montana in that 49ers team? Was there that opportunity for, him to really, even get back? And, as we kind of look at that what if scenario, because I know, I know you and I have talked about it ad nauseum too, just thinking of, with the USFL coming back this year, I know it looks a little bit different as we look at how it was portrayed there in the 80s, but, think of, what the potentials could have been with the USFL if they would have forced an NFL merger with that lawsuit. As we kind of look at that, Jim Kelly would never end up on the Bills. What does the AFC look like in there for the early 90s? Herschel Walker might not ever end up on the Cowboys. Does the Cowboy dynasty ever come to fruition because they don't have, the arsenal to trade to the Vikings and then, do what they did with those draft picks? So, I always love this what if game, especially then when we talk about the 94 strike. Is the Expos still in Montreal instead of being the Nationals if, the 94 season plays out the full year and, they had the best team in baseball? Do they win that title and do they stay in Montreal?
Does Buck Showalter win a World Series? Does he stay as the Yankees manager for a long time? Does Joe Torre end up becoming the Hall of Fame manager that he ends up becoming? There's a lot of things there. As you mentioned, that 94 strike, does a team actually end up with a losing record coming out of the AL West, because they were absolutely abysmal, and who knows what ends up happening. I mean, we could all get thrown for a loop, because for all we know, White Sox ended up winning the World Series 11 years earlier than they expected, because they were leading, or they were in a neck and neck race with the Indians at the time. And I mean, a whole bunch of, like I said, a whole bunch of crazy stuff occurred. Does Ken Griffey Jr. or Jeff Bagwell or someone else or Matt Williams break the record before Mark McGwire? They're 94, like as you mentioned, has a number of what ifs. And I mean, I'm just trying to think of anything else. Even little things. What if Jeffrey Mayer doesn't catch that ball over right field? Because then that changes the whole tone of that Orioles-Yankees ALCS in 96, because after that, they completely had the momentum. The Yankees had the momentum, and they end up going on and beating the Braves. Was not to say the Braves don't end up winning back-to-back World Series, beating the Orioles or something like that. You never know. And, I mean, even just looking at the 2016 World Series, Cubs, Indians, Cubs, Indians, Cubs, Guardians. That's something that's still taking a little used to, as opposed to like the Washington Commanders. But what's not to say, it's Cleveland who ends up breaking the curse that year. They end up winning. Outside of the Browns, they end up winning the NBA Finals. They end up winning the World Series. That's a huge boon for a city that's been known as, honestly, sometimes unfairly, a doormat either for sports or for anything in pop culture.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned actually another good one, Earl, with Ken Griffey Jr. As we have looking at the upcoming MLB draft, I know in recent years they've changed the rules to kind of have the worst team from the previous year have the number one overall pick. But if you go back to the years that Griffey was actually drafted, they rotated between the AL and the NL having the first overall pick by the worst team in that league. So the year Griffey was obviously drafted, the Mariners had the first pick. But if you went by worst record, the Pirates would have actually had the first pick that year. And could you have imagined a outfield with Ken Griffey Jr., Barry Bonds, and Andy Van Slyke in those early 90s Pirates teams? Could we be looking at a early dynasty? And then does Bonds ever actually make it to San Francisco if they potentially win a World Series or two with Griffey Jr. in center and Bonds in left?
Yeah, or eventually, maybe they decide to trade Van Slyke and Bonilla goes to the outfield, and then an
Hmm.
outfield and the lineup. The lineup's already potent with Bonds and potentially Griffey and potentially Bonilla, and then okay, Van Slyke. Maybe Bonilla stays in the outfield, stays at third base. Jeff King doesn't play, or maybe Andy Van Slyke. Or maybe Orlando Merced doesn't play, or then again, who knows? That also changes fortunes. Maybe then Sid Bream doesn't leave to go to Atlanta, and Sid Bream ends up becoming a nightmare for Pirates fans when you think about that one play that hit that I always think of when I think of the Braves, where it's Bream coming around third and sliding in and winning the game.
Yep, and then even from myself as a Mets fan, I think that might even change. We might not be celebrating Bobby Bonilla Day every July 1st because he might not sign that mega deal with the Mets. After in free agency. So, I think that's one of those one random change in a rule could really have set three different franchises off on different places. And as you even kind of look at Seattle, without Griffey Jr., are they still in Seattle? Does Safeco Field at that point, get built to replace the Kingdome?
Yeah, maybe it's the Mariners going to DC. Maybe, who knows?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and you always look at that thing. I always look at this. I always go back, and I'm gonna always go back with the Orioles stuff. What if the Orioles never pull off the Glenn Davis trade? Then they end up having a rotation of Mike Mussina, Pete Harnish, who was a very solid pitcher, and then you have Schilling. Whether he figures it out in Baltimore, who knows? And then that doesn't precipitate them. But then again, who knows? Maybe that means then you end up going with the likes of David Segui at first base. That doesn't mean you get Rafael Palmeiro, which does
Mm-hmm.
also leads another chain reaction. Will Clark doesn't leave San Francisco. And then, who knows? So you have a lineup. Well, maybe Bonds doesn't leave, as you mentioned, but then you have a lineup of Matt Williams, Will Clark, maybe Kevin Mitchell stays. And like I said, that's a huge chain reaction as well because little things occur. The Orioles don't go out of their way to try to get a first baseman. Maybe they think, oh, David Segui will be David Segui, and you being a Mets fan seeing it, David Segui was fairly good when he was healthy with the Mets. Maybe they don't make that trade because the only reason they trade Segui is because they all of a sudden signed Palmeiro and they don't need an Segui was already probably looking for space. They already had him playing left field. They didn't need him with Brady Anderson. They didn't need him with Mike Devereaux. They didn't need him with Jeffrey Hammonds. That's a whole thing. I mean, that could also cause a whole bunch of issues. And then,
Oh yeah, and then even thinking of the changes that they made just this year. Think of the universal DH now. If you had that in the National League, say 10, 15, 20 years ago, how many careers might have been extended? How many outs that pitchers have just made? Would games have absolutely changed across pantheons of seasons?
yeah, there'll be no Mike Hampton having his crazy run of hitting 10 homers. Jim Thome probably stays in Philly playing first base. That lineup still stays, or playing DH. That's still a very potent weapon. Or just think about some of the guys, as you mentioned, extended careers. I mean, Julio Franco probably could play till he's 50 if he's a DH because he could still hit, whether his fielding was on par. I mean, the bat, that was one thing that didn't get old was the bat.
Yeah, and I think as you kind of even look at baseball itself, and we briefly mentioned that '94 strike. It's I think that changed the game on because when we talk contraction, when we talk all moving of these teams, there are rumors that out there that hey, the Giants might have been moving to Tampa. Back in the '80s, the Pirates were potentially looking at moving to Denver. The Mariners were on the move. The Twins were looking to get contracted with the Expos. So I think that full landscape could have completely changed on a lot of these franchises. That have nice new stadiums now, but could have potentially been on the move there during the late '80s, early '90s as well.
And it's interesting that you talk about, and we'll get to the what ifs again. What are your thoughts on publicly funded stadiums? I know that's a big thing, and you see it in a lot of sports, especially how we just saw with the NFL. Sometimes, where how Washington used to be the place to go, or Tampa Bay used to, or St. Petersburg used to be the place to go for baseball, just like how LA and St. Louis and Baltimore and all those places were for the NFL. I mean, what are your thoughts on the idea of publicly funded stadiums?
Without taking a true political stance on it, Earl, I mean, at the end of the day, these franchises are now within the billions and billions of dollars. But I mean, they do, great things for the community, both, bringing business down to, the restaurants, parking, all the different, facets. And I know, they're big job perspectives, but, it's one of those things to where I think, as we look at a lot of these stadiums, and I know a lot of teams are now going to the multi-use, indoor retractable dome stadiums, as long as, it's a benefit to the community, absolutely. But, I think, as we kind of look at the benefits as well, I think the franchise values are also getting sky high as well. So, because I think, they mentioned yesterday, or might have been this morning on ESPN radio, sounds like the Broncos might be sold for a cool $5 billion to somebody as well.
Mm-hmm. And I was thinking about like the situation with the Rams moving to St. Louis or moving back from St. Louis to LA. Stan Kroenke's was paying for most of that stadium outside of his pocket, out of his own pocket, which again, just like with Jack Kent Cooke with the whole Washington thing at FedEx Field, he paid for it out of pocket. Yes, maybe the local municipality paid for infrastructure and things, extending public transit, but outside of that, if you're going to pay a whole ton of money to build your own stadium, as long as you don't offend, as long as it's not an environmental impact, have at it. I mean, I guess the other thing is putting municipal places over a barrel to build those facilities without giving them much of a say, especially naming rights and things like that. That can be a bit problematic in my opinion.
Yeah, it's always a tough battle. So, yeah, it's one of those things that's no good answer, I think, on that one.
Oh yeah, definitely. And now you have the opportunity after you left left the Delmarva Shoreboard. Where did your career take you after that?
Yes, so after the Shorebirds, I actually landed with the American Heart Association here in Pittsburgh and helped to coordinate their Pittsburgh Heart Walk, which was our annual fundraising 5K, to where the funds went back to help fight cardiovascular disease and stroke. And then after about 5 years there, I jumped over to Highmark Health, and I was their their Highmark Walk director, to where we helped raise about $6.6 million for local health and human service nonprofits across the state of Pennsylvania and Delaware. And then just recently, I'm actually back with my alma mater as well. So I'm going to be doing some corporate and foundation donations with them as well.
When it comes to doing those types of jobs, really, what type of work goes into that, especially I'm assuming a lot of networking and things like that. How do you just try to at least not only ensure and solidify relationships, but how do you try to establish new ones outside, especially with maybe an entity that doesn't have, that you're not connected with?
Yeah, I think, obviously the biggest thing is networking, as we kind of look at that perspective, always looking for that referral of, somebody happened to, I might know that might be able to introduce me to somebody, just as we did, with ticket sales there in baseball. It was kind of always one of those questions to say, hey, I know you're excited about joining us. Is there anybody that that would want to join us as well, whether that be, somebody in the business world or, somebody that was a, personal friend. So, as we kind of looked at those, aspects as well, it's kind of the same thought process in the nonprofit as well. I know there's a lot of great causes out there as well. But, from that perspective, we're always looking for, those connections to say, hey, you might know somebody that might be, affected by, cardiovascular disease, or, for a lot of the, nonprofits I was working with through the Highmark Walk, it was, hey, you might, know another health and human service agency that might be able to benefit from this event as well. So,
how much work goes into putting on those events? When does that start? Does it really start the next day after that event finishes? Is it, 365 days to the next one?
Yeah, for me, for the most part, it usually did start, if not the day after, the week after. Because, a lot of times as we look at events, it's getting permits, getting time at, the different venues, getting on those calendars as early as possible. And then really, from our perspective, it's always in that planning stage to make sure, we're orienting, the new organizations, getting them up to speed, and making sure that we get them off on the right foot, because oftentimes, the event might be or May and June, but that registration process might start in February, and the training might be in September, October. So when you kind of really start to backdate those events, we would accept donations up through the end of June. That process really would start there again in July and August.
What are in your new role at Slippery Rock at your alma mater? What are some of the things that you're hoping to bring out? If you can't really, disclose as much what you're looking to do for your alma mater.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, obviously, with my new role is to make sure that I'm affecting the student population, whether that be via scholarships, whether that be equipment donations, whether that be anything to really advance their experience and make sure that they have the best collegiate experience that they possibly can. But then also setting them up for success outside the classroom, as they start to get into life as well as into their careers. So as I kind of look at that. That'll be my biggest goal, is to make sure that what I'm doing is affecting that great student population, and I think as we continue to grow and really affecting on that day-to-day basis, anybody that would come to the Rock.
What would you say is the biggest lesson you've learned from all your experiences on your career path that'll help you as you are in this new role?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I've learned, and this goes all the way back to my ticketing days with the Shorebirds, is hey, don't be afraid to pick up the phone and have a conversation with somebody. If the worst thing that they're going to ever tell you is no, and it might not just be for them at that particular time, you can always check back in with them later. But I think as you kind of progress, and I've even kind of learned this in the nonprofit side of things, is you need to ask the question, because without asking that question, you're never going to know that answer. So it might not be a yes at that particular moment, but you'll find really, and you'll learn about potentially who you're working with, whether it be a donor, whether it be somebody you're looking to work with, of why they might want to get involved with you, or why they might not want to get involved with you. And you can always kind of cater to that next time you talk to them, to say hey, especially in the ticket world, hey, a mini plan might not work because they're all Fridays and Saturdays, and you might have work those nights. But hey, would a weekday plan potentially work for you? So just being able to really take those rejections back and kind of say hey, it might not just be today, but it's something down the road. And then even from that perspective, just never be afraid to ask, because you never know that answer.
What would you say the biggest piece of advice was that you ever received?
I think the biggest thing for me, it was always just be fearless with it. The worst case scenario is like I kind of mentioned earlier, it was you might get rejected, but it's just taking that fear out of that scenario, because I know for a lot of the kids coming out of college, sales might not be their thing, and it's definitely a skill set you have to learn over the years, and you have to cater to your style, or the organization you might be a part of. But I think, as you look at that, it's just being fearless and saying, hey, I know I can do this. I'm going to bet on myself. And the worst case scenario, they might say no, but you can go right on to the next person, because there's always somebody else to call. There's always somebody else to network with, and there's always somebody else to kind of talk to, and, see if they might be interested in the product, and, or, in this case, the university that I'll be kind of, looking to help.
I've been asking a lot of guests this question. What would be the one thing you would say to the younger version of yourself, whether it's 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago?
I think the younger version of myself would just be, hey, everything's going to definitely work out. As you kind of look at the career, as we look at sports, it was a lot of long hours and low pay. And, I think, from that perspective, it's fun, but, it can definitely be a drain on you from that perspective. But, just, hey, it's going to work out eventually. And, just keep your nose to the ground and keep grinding. And I think, from, everything in life, as long as you keep grinding, if you put the work into it, eventually, you'll get a break here and there.
What are your expectations? And I didn't want to forget this, expectations for this year's Miami Dolphins. I know a new coaching change and everything that's sort of going on. What are your expectations for this team under a new coach?
Yeah, I think, I'm very encouraged by the moves that they made. I think as we look at the stable of running backs that we now have, there's no excuse now when we look at, having, not only Gaskin, but now we have Sony Michel, we have Chase Edmonds, as well as, Mostert. So I think, any one of those four would be a capable back. I don't think from a fantasy perspective, they're going to be a, conglomerate that you'll be able to bank on if you're looking at individually. But then even, having Waddle and now, that big trade that we made for Tyreek Hill and, the offensive lineman additions of Armstead and Williams, I think the biggest piece as we look at it is Tua really has no excuses now. So, the biggest thing is I'm excited to see, from McDaniel's perspective, great run game in San Francisco. Can he translate that here to Miami? And then even their pickup yesterday with Melvin Ingram on the defensive side, I think that's been the biggest thing, really getting to the quarterback for the Dolphins. So, putting him with Phillips and, even Wilkins being on that defensive line, I think they're, starting to make the moves that, they, are really going to be in that playoff contention. And like I said, it's all going to really come down to Tua. And I think, his ascension here in year 2 to year 3, because, statistically, if you kind of look at, his numbers to, Allen's or, a couple of the other quarterbacks as they've kind of progressed in their first 2 years, it's pretty equatable. It's just, can he stay on the field? And, really, I think, as they look at the offense, are they going to take the handcuffs off him and really get back to some of the things that he did well, whether that be RPO or some of the, intermediate to deep throws that you haven't really saw from him the first couple of years, but, really kind of using then Hill and Waddle to their skill sets as well.
Does it matter on if they underperform, whether Chris Grier will be out of a job, especially now a coaching change and things like that? If they underperform severely, or if they pull another, as what happened with Flores, a couple of 10 or 9-win seasons, and you miss the playoffs by a game, does that mean curtains for Grier?
I think he's close. Just seeing that they still have the draft capital in the next year's draft, I think, it could be a make or break year for him because, we all kind of heard the, rumors back and forth with the whole Brady thing. I think, that definitely had some tread to it that was in the works before anything kind of broke. But I think, even looking at, next year's class, they have the capital that if Tua doesn't work out, they can go up and potentially get one of these, quarterbacks coming out, whether it's a Stroud or the kid from Alabama, as you kind of look at that class, or, is it going to get a veteran with the 2 first-rounders I believe they have next year as well? So I think, Grier, I think is trending upward with the moves that he made this year. But I think, as you kind of look at that, potentially, hopefully all the pieces come together. And then, same, with my Mets as well this year, I think, off to the good start, and I knock on wood, don't want to curse them at all. But, I think with, potentially getting DeGrom back at some point this season, if they can kind of keep playing as they have, and now having the owner that, hey, if we need somebody, we're going to go get him, I'm very, very encouraged in those regards as well. So.
What are your thoughts on Buck Showalter as Mets manager? I know that, of course, there could have been some skepticism. The guy who didn't win the big ring, sort of like Dusty Baker in this case. Also, his last time managing, he lost 108 games, which with a $100 million payroll. What were your thoughts about Showalter being hired?
I like the hire because truthfully, it's one of those things. And if you look back at his time with the Yankees, is he knows how to handle that New York media, which I think the last couple of managers have definitely gotten crushed by, overanalyzing each decision. But I think the biggest thing that I've kind of really noticed in the early season with watching them, and it's especially even true with kind of the coaching staff, is Alonso and McNeil seem, and even Dominic Smith seem more relaxed at the plate. It seems like that they're just kind of actually, traditionally looking for a certain pitch instead of, the analytics that might have gotten through, hey, you're going to look for, 7 different things, to whereas I think that, hire of Chavez with being the hitting coach, I think is truly paying dividends outside of Showalter, where, he is really kind of coaching to that old school mentality to where it's not necessarily looking at the analytics as, it might be, more of the field perspective, and especially letting, Scherzer go an extra inning here, or, having Miguel, throw 5, and then the, night they had a combined no, you can say, well, hey, he, pulled him after 5, but ultimately they got the same result though out of the guys they brought in after the fact.
Do you think David Stearns is going to be the president of baseball operations after this season? I know the talk is that Epler is just a placeholder for the person that the Mets have really wanted, and his contract runs out this season. And also, I guess the good thing is you can be assured that if this doesn't work out, you guys are going to win the World Series eventually, regardless of what happens, because everybody knows the whole Buck Showalter thing. It's happened twice before. There's a good chance it might happen again. So,
yeah, I would love to see a title here at some point. And like I said, I had one when I was one, but then obviously I don't remember that one at all. But then we've had those close chances of losing to the Yankees with the back and forth with Clemens and Piazza, and then the tragedy of their collapse when the Phillies caught them, and then obviously losing to the Cardinals there in the LCS. So I'm hoping to get one here soon, and I think the team that they're constructing now, whether it be down the road with a trade deadline, I just hope that if they need something, they're going to go get it, and hopefully DeGrom comes back on the mend here, and then we have two aces to roll into any playoff series down the road.
One more hypothetical. What happens if Carlos Beltran keeps the job, the Astros thing doesn't occur? Do you think that Beltran would be leading the Mets to a record like Showalter has him right now?
That's a tough one because it's like you don't know how the guys would do. I think, for every Aaron Boone that you see, have success as part of that, you also see the guys kind of flounder. Not so much in baseball, seeing that, but Robin Ventura is a great one. When he took over the White Sox, didn't really have that great success, but that was his first manager position. So I think, it's kind of that 50-50 of, would have Beltran succeeded? I think, he would have been able to handle the media, but I don't know, did he have the, baseball acumen? And, I kind of go back and forth, but I do like Buck as the hire though, currently with the Mets.
And as we start to wrap this up, Brandon, I really appreciate you taking your time out of your schedule to do this. What are ways people can reach out to you on social media to talk either Dolphins, Mets, or even Slippery Rock?
Yeah, so I'm on the obviously Instagram with Baxter. He is at the Fluffy Baxter. If you guys want to follow him, like we said earlier, big in the overseas countries. But from that perspective, you can join in on his adventures. For me, it's at Brandon Berns on Twitter, as well as on Facebook as well. So just first name, last name on that perspective.
Brandon, I really appreciate it. For everybody who's been watching, thank you guys for tuning in for both interviews. What we'll do, Brandon, once we finish this, we'll talk briefly in the live stream room and finish this off. But for everybody who's been watching, thank you guys for tuning in to my interviews earlier with Jordan Levere and now with Brandon Berns. And for my guest, Brandon Berns, I am Earl Holland saying thank you guys, and just keep your eyes tuned to social media for our next live stream. Again, thank you guys, and we'll see you very soon.